Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Hausdorff Reads the Bible. Today's reading is Genesis 5 along with the first part of 6. The reason I'm doing that is, 5 isn't the most interesting chapter, not a lot happens. But 6 sort of runs right into 7. So today I'm going to do 5 in the first half of 6, and then tomorrow I'm going to do the second half of 6 and 7. Alright, anyway, it's probably more information than you needed there, but let's just get started. And our first section is the entirety of chapter 5, which is Adam's descendants to Noah. And now you probably know why I didn't want to just stick with this. Okay, so let's go ahead and just power through this. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Okay, we have a few interesting things to talk about here. Let's see. First of all, I had asked yesterday, or maybe the day before, whatever. I asked previously where Cain's wife came from, and we know that Eve was supposed to be the mother of all humans, or the originator of all humans, or however you want to put it. So any other women must have come from her, so it must be his sister. And this verse here does indicate that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters, although it mentions that he had Seth, and presumably the rest of them would come after him, although it also doesn't mention Cain and Abel here, so everything's a little mixed up. You could say that these contradict each other, or if you want to be charitable, you can say that they're focusing on different details. I think it's just poorly written, I guess. And the other thing is the amount of time they're living here. Adam lived 930 years. So, we have a few interesting things to talk about here. And this is right out of Guzik. So first, he wants to, there's a few things from him. One, we want to talk about the claim that the universe is less than 10,000 years old. So this is from Guzik directly. One can arrange the following genealogies in a sequential manner and chart out a timeline. However, one cannot establish an absolutely reliable timeline with this method because biblical genealogies are not always complete. Sometimes generations are skipped over. If one takes the genealogies as being without omission, the time of Adam comes to be some 4,000 or 5,000 years before Christ. Even with omissions, it is hard to imagine that the time of Adam was significantly more than perhaps 10,000 years before Jesus. This puts the biblical record at incredible variance with the assertions of modern science. Yet there are good reasons to believe God created the earth with age built in, even as Adam and the trees had age built into them. I don't know, that's just kind of silly, right? How do you explain that everything looks like it's old? Oh, well, God created light en route. It's billions of years, places are, these galaxies are, billions of light years away, so this light had to be en route for billions of years. Oh, well, God created it en route. That seems a little bit silly to me. I mean, isn't it a much easier explanation that it's actually that old? And I heard, I wish I could give a proper reference where I heard this, but, well, whatever. When, we can track light going around big gravitational wells, and we can see where it's been, so when you create light en route, you're creating a history like that. So that's a lot of work for God to go through. Why not just create that amount of time? Why does it have to be this 10,000 years? The whole thing's silly. So, yeah, this seems to be the basis of young Earth creationism. They've taken these genealogies and they work backwards, and I don't know. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about that. It's completely ridiculous and silly, but I don't know. People who think that makes sense to them, I don't think there's anything that we can say that's going to change their mind. Well, obviously I think there is because I do this. But I have no idea what's going to stick. I think you just have to say what's logical to you, and hopefully it'll stick with somebody. The other thing that was interesting that he mentioned was the fact that they live about, almost 1,000 years. He says the following: "It's more likely that people did live much, much longer before the flood. This is because the degenerative effects of the fall on the human gene pool had not yet accumulated greatly. And because the environment in the pre-flood world was so different, with the blanket of water vapor surrounding the earth, the post-flood world lifespans quickly came down to the lifespans we're familiar with today." So I find this very interesting. The mix of this crazy fantasy, bringing in the part of the creation story that we have with the water. Had to pause my recording there, but now I'm back. I sort of lost my train of thought. Let's see. I was talking about his mix of crazy fantasy from the creation story and the idea that, this thing in the Bible is literally true, even though if you look at it objectively, it's very clearly ancient people struggling to understand the world. Combining that with some ideas of how we view the world currently, how genes work, gene pool, and it kind of doesn't make sense. I mean, think about this. You've got God who is punishing people for disobeying him and setting it up in a way that these issues are going to propagate through a few generations before it gets down to the lifespan that he really wants. Are you kidding? That's just crazy. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to say that is all that's interesting from chapter 5, so let me just burn through it. It's just some people and how long they lived. Okay, verse 6. "When Seth lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. Seth lived, after he fathered Enosh, 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan. Enosh lived after he fathered Kenan 850 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he fathered Mahalalel. Kenan lived after he fathered Mahalalel 840 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Kenan were 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he fathered Jared. Mahalalel lived after he fathered Jared 830 years, and had other sons and daughters." Oh my God, this is so monotonous and boring. "Thus all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he had fathered Enoch. Jared lived after he fathered Enoch 800 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch lived with God..." Oh, this one's slightly different. "Enoch walked with God after he fathered Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Whoa. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. It sounds like he didn't die like the rest of them. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he fathered Lamech. Methuselah lived after he fathered Lamech 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son, and called his name Noah, saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord had cursed..." Saying, "Out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands." Lamech lived after he fathered Noah 595 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. After Noah was 500 years old, Noah fathered Shem, Ham, and Japheth. All right, that's chapter 5. If you've been... time to wake up, because there's something else happening here. I'm going to start chapter 6. Man, that was brutal. That was totally brutal. When I read this earlier, I just scanned through those. I didn't even notice that there was that one guy who seems like he didn't die, but God took him right to heaven. Seems like something that would be worthy a little more detail, don't you think? Other than just being in the middle of a genealogy where everyone dies, and then he goes, oh yeah, that guy didn't die, just God took him. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Isn't there an interesting story behind that? Because if he's so amazing that God decided he didn't have to die, but could pull him right up to heaven, that sounds like somebody whose life we might be interested in. Oh, but no, he didn't die. All right, anyway, moving on to the next guy. Awful. Okay. All right, this next section is called Increasing Corruption on Earth. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. Okay, now, this very phrase I find really interesting. The sons of God, so, this is God's people or something, and the daughters of man. So why is it daughters of man and sons of God? My first thought is it's just pure sexism, which I think is a reasonable guess. And then Guzik provided 2 guesses. One was that the descendants of Cain were called the descendants of man, and the descendants of Adam and Eve, but not Cain, are the descendants of God. I think that sounds like kind of a crappy explanation, especially since Cain was a son of man, so you're just getting one extra generation away. It's like this one branch God's disowning, which is crap. Another explanation is that angels came down and got it on with the humans, and then created this other, I don't know, half-breeds or something between angels and humans, which sounds crazy, except it kind of comes up later in this vague thing. And that seemed to be what Guzik ran with. I'm not sure which of those 3 explanations seems more reasonable. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of detail here, so who knows? But that's what to keep in mind. Okay, so moving forward. And they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord God said, my spirit shall not abide in this man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. Okay, so what that sounds like to me is people aren't going to be able to live 900 years anymore, they're going to live 120 years. Guzik says, no, this means that 120 years from the day that God said that, he's going to start the Great Flood. Honestly, both seem like reasonable explanations. I think what I said seems more natural based on the way it is, but his explanation is consistent with the text, so fair enough. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. When the sons of God came into their daughters of man, and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Okay, so that Nephilim thing is, what are the Nephilim? It's not clear. I looked it up on Wikipedia. It seems like it could be giants, it could be angels, it could be demons, because demons are really just fallen angels, right? So it's not clear. And so maybe the demons having sex with the women, producing children, and those are the daughters of man, and then the sons of God. But again, there's just so little detail here. How much of this are we blowing out of proportion, and how much of, what does it really mean? Who knows? Okay. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Man, that's an awkward sentence. What that said was God doesn't like what he's seeing in humans because everything they think is evil. Okay, moving forward. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animal and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Okay. So, we have a couple of issues here. One, God is sorry that he created people. He wishes he didn't, apparently, and he wants to just kill everybody. So there's a couple of things. For one thing, well, he's a violent monster. But this is nothing new. We saw this in the we saw this in the New Testament plenty. By the way, the New Testament is the one that everyone says is much more humane. But anyway, he's a violent monster. He has regrets for creating humans because they're so evil, and he decides to just drown everybody. And while we're at it, let's drown all of the animals too. Except, of course, not everybody. For some reason, Noah has caught God's eye, and he's fine with Noah. And so here was what I read in Guzik's argument. It basically said, God is sad at what he sees, and he's sort of, he's sad for what he has to do, but he is, he's not regretting that he did it. He's just sorry that he's sorry that things have gotten to where they are, and he's sorry that he has to take this action. And it's sort of a compelling argument if you don't think about it very much. This is very common in religion, that as long as you turn off your brain at least halfway, it's fine. And so here's what it makes me think of. I'm not a father, but I was a child, and I can imagine. So let's think about dealing with your children. Suppose they have to go through something that kind of sucks, but ultimately has a good result. The things that come to mind for me are, taking medicine. I hated taking medicine when I was a kid. Had to take a lot of it, and it was a horrible experience, and I'm sure my parents hated putting me through it. But they did because it was important that I take it. We had to, everybody hates doing homework when they're a kid, and your parents might feel bad that, they feel bad that you have to go through it, but they know that it's ultimately good for you. So we're familiar with this idea that, you can be sorry that you have to put your kids through this thing, but, on some deeper level, you know that it's better for them. Okay, so I think that's the idea. It's kind of like you got to break some omelets to make an egg kind of deal. So why does that not work here? It's because God's going to kill everybody. Oh, is this all for Noah's benefit? If it's all for Noah's benefit, why not just start with Noah instead of starting with Adam and Eve, who are apparently crap because they immediately disobeyed, which is apparently the worst thing you can ever do, and then they immediately had a son who killed their other son. Anyway, it's not, I think my analogy, which is what, he doesn't say this specifically, but I think that's the kind of thing he's trying to bring up. It doesn't really work. It's not that, humanity's bringing up, humanity for the sake of Noah, or, that's what he's doing. That's not equivalent to making a kid take their medicine or study. That would be the equivalent of having, let's say, 12 children, and then at some point slaughtering 11 of them for the benefit of the last one who's alive. And clearly, that's no good. I think if you have no problem with having 12 kids and then killing 11 of them, if it'll help that other one, please stop listening to my podcast. But if you're a rational, reasonable person who has some moral fiber in their body, you'll see that that's insane, and clearly what God is doing is much worse, because not only are they killing most of their children except one, he's also killing the family pet and any other animal that happens to exist that he brought into existence. And of course, the other reason that my analogy that, of course, Guzik kind of inspired without saying directly, fails is that part of the reason we have to put our kids through these things is that, well, we have to live in this real world, and we don't have complete control over it. I'm sure my parents would have been happy to just snap their fingers and make my sickness go away, but instead they have to, get me to take this pill that I don't want to take, or, take this cough medicine that tastes awful, and certainly an all-powerful, all-knowing God could come up with a better solution than to just drown everybody. I mean, he could have just snapped his fingers and made everybody disappear. All right. Well, that's enough rambling. So that's where I'm going to cut it off today. So tomorrow we'll start on verse 9, which is Noah and the flood. And then halfway through that story, it switches over to chapter 7, which is still Noah and the flood. And so we'll write the rest of 6 and 7 tomorrow. Well, thank you very much for listening, and I will see you tomorrow to finish this particular chapter.